Chapter 6 Home on the Cliffside. The mare's hooves pounded against the dirt road as she galloped through the fields of Hyrule, guided by her owner, who was determined to get his passengers safely to their next destination. While he focused on the road, skillfully shooting down any bokoblin who made the unfortunate decision to jump out from their hiding spots in the tall grass, the woman seated between his legs couldn't help but look sorrowfully at their surroundings. The closer they got to the southeastern mountains, the more she saw the overgrown remains of civilization. Scattered across the fields were the fragments of stone archways and towns, now occupied by crudely built camps filled with monsters that threatened any form of life daring to step into their territory. A plethora of dead barren trees added an extra sorrow to the desolate view. While some had managed to sprout new growth, the majority remained nothing more than the wooden corpses of trees that couldn't recover from their fate 100 years before. This was already heartbreaking for her, and when she saw one of the rusted spidery machines sitting helplessly on top of a hill, seemingly watching them as they passed, though its mechanical eye remained dark, she felt her heart sink completely.
Link, we'll be arriving there soon, won't we?
Link didn't respond immediately, pretending to focus on his archery. He knew the place she spoke of, and he truly wished they could have avoided it, but this was the only path that could take them directly to their destination. He continued to fire his bow, striking down the porcine creatures that threatened them. After watching as they fell to the ground, dropping their handcrafted wooden spears, he looked up at the sky, where the sun had almost reached its peak.
It's half a day's journey from Kakariko through West Necluda to reach Fort Hateno, so we should be there in about an hour.
I see.
Link looked down at her, trying to catch a glimpse of her features, but all he could see was her long, flowing golden hair. Though he wished there was another way, he had to admit that it would probably be for the best. Eventually, she was going to be reminded of it, and if she weren't going to see it now, it would only delay the inevitable. With a silent breath, he refocused his attention on the passing road, keeping an eye out for any more bokoblins that would attempt to strike them. The further they traveled down the path, the more dead trees and damaged guardians littered the fields. There were bare patches of soil spaced throughout the destruction, where grass simply would not grow from the damage incurred. Before long, the ravaged wall of the old fort came into view, but its remaining magnificence wasn't enough to pull Zelda's gaze away from the spot she had noticed in the distance. Taking the reins into her hands, she brought Epona to a halt. She remained quiet, staring at where she and her companion seated behind her had ultimately shared their last moment before being separated for an unfathomable length of time. After a while, she found it in herself to look around at the rest of the ruins, even taking a moment to stare at the great wall that spanned across the mountain pass. Yet, her gaze always returned to that particular spot. Link remained silent, simply observing as Zelda appeared to be lost in a world of her own. He still couldn't see her eyes. In fact, it seemed as though she were actively trying to hide them, using the breeze in her hair to obstruct his view of her. Finally, after a few minutes, she spoke.
Do you remember what happened here?
I do.
Do you remember everything?
Link remained silent, unable to decipher what she meant by everything. Taking his silence as a negative response, she continued.
That might be a blessing. To me, this was so long ago, and yet it also feels as if it only took place a few days prior to today. I remember every hit you took for me, every guardian and monster you slayed, the struggle I put you and everyone else who took shelter here through. I thought seeing the castle would bring about the most pain, and yet somehow this is worse.
After a few more moments, Link tugged on the reins, guiding the horse back down the path. He couldn't bear to watch her like this, simply staring at the ghost of their past. Zelda didn't protest his sudden decision to take her away. Internally, she knew she couldn't look for much longer, as much as she didn't want to admit it. With a gentle tap to Epona's side, he brought her to a trot before eventually she returned to her usual stride. Closing her eyes, Zelda opted to lean against Link's chest for comfort as they continued toward the gate. While this would normally make her face burn and her heart beat faster in her chest, this time, his warmth served to calm her tortured mind as they passed by yet more destroyed guardians and rubble. As the breeze once again blew through their hair, they rode along the path and under the fortress's open gate, entering the dense forest behind its decaying wall. They rode for hours, slowly making their way up the path through more forests, ravines, and mountains. By the time the entrance gate of their destination came into view, the sun had already begun its descent. Link slowed his mare to a trot and looked down at the girl resting against his chest. Zelda's head began to droop, her body losing balance every now and then. Gently, he placed a few fingers on the side of her shoulder, which made her jolt slightly.
Link, are we at Pores?
Not exactly, but we will arrive at the village soon. I know you want to see Pura as soon as possible, but I think it's best we go and see her tomorrow.
What? Why tomorrow?
She tried to look back at him, fatigue clearly visible in her eyes. Link gave her a small, warm smile.
I'm sorry to say, but it doesn't look like you have the energy to properly greet anyone at the moment. You must still be recovering your strength after being freed from the castle, and we have been riding for an entire day. I know how badly you want to see her, but I think it would be best to visit when you're properly rested.
Zelda frowned at him, then turned to face forward in the saddle, clearly wanting to deny his words. After a few moments, she hummed tiredly.
You truly believe I should see her tomorrow?
I do. Besides, if I'm being completely honest, if you did see her this evening, you might think you're dreaming.
What's that supposed to mean?
You'll see tomorrow.
Keeping her shoulder held tight to keep her upright, he felt her head bob again before leaning back to rest between his collarbone and neck. Bringing his mare to a gentle walk, they passed under the village sign with the name Hateno carved onto its front. With a deep, calming breath, he looked out into the village he had become so familiar with. Compared to the kingdom towns and villages they were used to seeing 100 years ago, this was considerably smaller, barely more than a hamlet. The settlement was established near the top of a mountain, though it wasn't the tallest peak in the range. Since other mountains surrounded it, the weather was still mild and even a little warm for being so high up. The village itself showed signs of age, with buildings whose walls were starting to peel. Despite their appearance, they were strong and sturdy. Each house and shop had the same signature style of build, tan in color, faded red shingles covering the rooftop, and a tall, slightly crooked chimney that required wooden beam supports to remain upright. While old in age and style, the mountain village was still a beauty to behold. It was one of the few villages spared from physical ruin by the calamity 100 years ago. Financially, the villagers toiled ceaselessly to keep their economy solvent by turning to agriculture. Even at this late hour, as Link and Zelda entered the village, farmers could still be seen in their small garden patches all around, sweaty and dirty as they finished a hard day's work. Link had grown to love this place, and admired the farmers who worked so hard so close to the ground. Of course, there were always exceptions. Those who would simply laze around, finding excuses not to work. One of those idlers was currently on his knees, digging through the soil beside the path Link and Zelda were arriving on. Link knew he wasn't looking for fresh crops to harvest. He wanted to just ignore him and ride past without a care in the world, and yet, His conscience just wouldn't allow him. Heaving a weary sigh, Link brought his horse to a slow stop and called out to the dirt groveler.
What are you doing down there, Manny?
At the call of his name, Manny gasped and jumped. He was a stout man, wearing green overalls and possessing a head of stringy hair that appeared to match their color. Twisting his body around, he glanced at the horse before looking up to see who sat in her saddle, revealing a slightly scrunched up face, the beginnings of a double chin, and a large nose. Upon realizing who it was that spoke, Manny's beady eyes lit up. He quickly pushed himself to his feet, dusting himself off as he locked eyes with the knight.
Link, you're finally back. And don't ask me what I'm doing. You should know full well I'm looking for crickets.
Unfortunately, I did know. I just hoped I was wrong. Manny, I really think you should give the crickets up. I don't think that's what Prima wants.
But you're the one who told me that's what she was into, and you got that information by asking her. So that means that's what she said.
Yeah, and I'm really regretting having tried to help you with that. You've given her enough crickets, and she didn't look too happy about them, so why don't you finally call it quits?
I can't just quit. I want to be with her. I want her to be mine. Maybe I just didn't have enough crickets. Yeah, that has to be it. I just didn't have enough.
Heaving yet another exasperated sigh, Link shook his head before lightly tapping his heel on Epona's side, urging the mare to start walking up the path again. At this, Manny began trotting himself to keep up with Epona's hooves.
Hey, where do you think you're going?
Link didn't even bother looking down at him, choosing to simply focus on the road as he tugged on the reins. The path split into two separate paths, one leading further up the mountain and deeper into the village, the other toward the outskirts of town. Guiding his horse, he took the path away from the rest of the town. Annoyingly, Manny continued to follow.
Link!
I'm going home. Happy?
What? You can't go home yet. I still need your help.
I don't think you do.
At the simple answer, the large Hylian furrowed his brow.
Look, first you tell me that Prima said she wanted crickets. Now you're telling me she doesn't want them. And instead of helping me, you're leaving me out to dry. Come on, Link. Throw me a bone here.
Look, Manny, I'm sorry. It was a misunderstanding on my part when I went to ask her what she was into. When I first came to Hateno, let's just say I wasn't yet fully awake, to say the least. Now that I am, I'm telling you she doesn't like crickets, and you digging your heels in and getting her more is only going to do worse. I don't know much when it comes to love, but I can at least tell when someone's annoyed. Give it up. She doesn't want them.
And what am I supposed to do now?
Ugh.
The two continued on, passing a small group of houses different from all the rest, boxy and colorful, built from wood instead of brick and clay. While very pretty, no one actually lived in these houses. They were simply for display. Link's destination was beyond, just across a small wooden bridge connected to another cliff. Escape was so close, and yet it felt so far all the same.
I've tried everything I could think of. And she's still playing hard to get.
As they approached the bridge, Link blew air through his lips in annoyance.
Maybe she's just not interested in you. Have you ever thought of that?
But at this point, why wouldn't she be interested in me?
At this, Link sighed and looked up into the cloudy orange sky of twilight, trusting Epona to continue following the path while he, unfortunately, had to listen to Manny's issues.
I've done so much for her, even if it was a misunderstanding. It's the thought that counts, right? Can't she see I'm trying here? I think I deserve to at least be recognized.
Maybe that's what your problem is, Manny.
Looking down at the girl sitting between his legs, he adjusted her body slightly, making sure she wouldn't fall as the mare's hooves stepped onto the wooden planks of the bridge they were about to cross over. Unfortunately, Manny followed, prompting Link to reluctantly continue.
doesn't really sound like your heart is in it.
What do you mean my heart isn't in it?
I mean, you say you're doing all this for Prima, but when's the last time you actually, talked to her?
I mean...
As expected, it was clear the large Hylian hadn't really attempted at all. Halfway across the bridge, Manny caught Link's judgmental glance before going on the defensive.
Look, I'm not like you, okay?
Like me? What's that supposed to mean?
I mean, it's amazing how you can just talk to anyone. It's like you don't have a care in the world. If you can talk to them, you will. It's annoying.
It's kinda surprising to get praise from you.
I don't know how you do it. If you wanted, you could probably get any woman you wanted in Hateno. Even now, I see you brought a girl back with you. Speaking of which, who is she?
Suddenly, Link's grip on Zelda's shoulder tightened.
Someone you don't need to concern yourself with. At least not now. Not ever, preferably.
Though Link's tone was stern, Manny continued to push for answers as they neared the end of the bridge.
Oh, come on, Link. Don't be like that. It's rare to see you so close to someone, especially a girl. In fact, now that I get a better look, she's pretty cute. Actually, she's even more than cute. She's beautiful.
Link's chest grew warm. Of course, Zelda was beautiful, that much was obvious. But hearing it come from Manny's mouth? That didn't sit right, at least not with him.
Hey, now that I'm thinking about it, you're taking that girl home. What do you plan to do with her in there?
If your words are headed where your head currently is, you'll have a few crickets down your trousers. That's a promise.
At this, Manny simply shrugged, clearly unfazed.
If anything, that would help me out. Now come on! Stop being so overprotective and tell me who that is in your arms. Is she yours?
Link felt something pulse inside of him. He gently tugged on Epona's reins, pulling the horse to a stop before she could step off the bridge. With a glare, he looked down into Manny's beady eyes.
Okay, maybe I didn't make myself clear the first time. If you say another word about this person that I'm holding, I will personally kick you off this bridge.
Jeez, Link, what's got you so upset? I was just asking.
Go home now, before I have Epona do the kicking for me.
In surrender, Manny raised his arms in the air as he took a step back.
Okay. I'll go.
He quickly took another step back when he realized Link wasn't loosening up.
I'm sorry. Jeez.
With that, Manny turned and began heading back across the bridge, though not without taking one curious look back as he did so. Link watched him go, sitting silently on his horse until his fellow villager was completely out of sight. The moment he was gone, Link's body relaxed, exhaling the air he hadn't realized he was holding in his lungs. He'd never disliked Manny, but something about that interaction bugged him more than usual, and he could take a decent guess as to why. Still, he couldn't help but feel like threatening to kick Manny off the bridge was a bit much. He usually found ways to de-escalate things a lot quicker, especially when it came to guys like Manny, who weren't evil, just stupid. With a slight grumble, Link faced forward on the saddle and looked toward the other cliff at the end of the bridge. The house beyond the bridge was relatively small, old, and worn. It resembled the other old houses in town, with its tan walls and tall crooked chimney in the back. Though all the houses in Hateno were old, spare the boxy wooden ones, this one was even older than the others. Its plaster was falling off the brick base, its red shingles were more faded than any of the other houses, and the horse stable that had been built beside it was basically just a few boards crudely nailed together. Despite its wear and tear, this was his home. Link's home. While the building itself looked old, the rest of the small field was actually very beautiful. It was situated on the edge of a cliff, The plot of land was actually quite large, more than big enough to hold a house, a small field, and a decent-sized pond. The grass was green, and trees were scattered around the edge of the mountainside. 2 trees in particular stood out, one on the side of the house beside the pond, the other very old and large one near the front of the house. Link would bathe in the pond beside the tree late in the evenings. The tree in front had a large cooking pot underneath where big dishes could be cooked if the old kitchen in the house wasn't enough. It was peaceful, and being away from the rest of town, it was quiet, perfect for training or relaxing when needed. For Link, it was the perfect little home, an oasis of peace he could escape to. At least, it should have been.
Well, I'll be, if it isn't Link.
Along with the old house, the trees, and the natural beauty were 2 men who reclined beside the cooking pot in front of it all. One was a plain fellow, wearing an open, sleeveless blue jacket, baggy white pants, and a simple haircut. His arms were more toned than most as a result of his chosen occupation. The man sitting next to him was his boss, a slim, older man even more toned than his subordinate. He wore a similar blue jacket, though his sleeves reached his elbows. That was where the similarities ended, for the rest of his clothing was bright and colorful. His baggy pants were a bright, lovely pink, matching the rope he had fancily tied around his bald head. His blue jacket had been accented with a fabulous yellow striped fur lining around the collar. Even his strong-jawed, sharp face had been given light decor with blush on his nose and around his eyes. He was a man built of elegance and work, one Link respected and liked. There was only one flaw with their acquaintanceship: how often he happened to find this balding man and his apprentice sitting in front of his house. Waving, the older man called out from his spot next to the cooking pot.
What are you doing just sitting over there? I've never seen you so shy to come back to this glorious house I fixed up for you.
With a deep breath, Link did his best to shove down his earlier annoyance with Manny before again tapping Epona's side with his heel. At the signal, the mare stepped off the bridge and onto the grass, taking both her riders to the cooking pot where the 2 men waited for him. The moment Link pulled Epona to a stop, the older man spoke.
There he is! Oh, for a second there, I thought you had stopped enjoying this marvelous house of yours.
Trying his best not to let his annoyance from earlier influence him, Link answered as kindly as he could.
Trust me, I enjoy it just as much as you enjoy that spot on the ground. What's so nice about sitting there, Bolson? You sit there a lot. Hey, Carson.
Carson waved from behind Bolson as the other man gracefully gestured toward the edge of the cliffside on the other end of the field.
Well, isn't the view here just divine? Even as a retiring carpenter, I still find inspiration in such beauty, no matter how many days pass. Come now, you of all people must understand, don't you?
I can't say that I don't.
Regardless of whether he wanted to or not, he couldn't deny that the view was gorgeous. From so high up, he could see the forests and mountain ranges he had just ridden through before arriving back in the village, and the sun was currently setting, giving everything a beautiful twilight glow. With a defeated frown, knowing full well that trying to convince the carpenter to stop squatting at his house was pointless, he resorted to trying to wake up the woman sitting in front of him. Taking note of said woman, Bolson raised an eyebrow.
You know, it seems as though the sunset isn't the only good view you have. Will we be having another wedding soon? Oh, if we are, I'll prepare plenty of petals for you.
I don't think that'll be necessary.
As Link said this, he began lightly tapping Zelda's shoulder, trying to wake her from her slumber. Watching his attempts, Bolson raised his other eyebrow.
Well, I'm not so sure. You seem awfully protective of her. You're acting a lot more serious than you usually do, hon.
Choosing to ignore Bolson's words, Link attempted to tap Zelda's shoulder a bit harder. In response, she grumbled before twisting her waist, burying her face deeper into his neck. Hearing Bolson's tuneful hum, Link frowned even more as he tried to lightly shake her awake. Taking his silence as a sign, Bolson pushed himself up from his spot in the grass, signaling for Carson to stand as well.
Well, we'd best be on our way home. But no matter what you tell me, honey, I can see that look in your eyes. They sparkle when you look at her. And I'd say her actions speak for themselves. Now come along, Carson. Let us give these two birdies the privacy they so well deserve.
Right.
With that, the two began to walk toward the bridge, with Carson waving and Bolson offering a little toodaloo as they passed. Pausing from his attempts to wake up his guest, he twisted in the saddle, careful not to let Zelda fall, and watched as they crossed the bridge and followed the same path Manny had earlier. He couldn't help but think about Bolson's words. He was being protective? Well, of course he was. Regardless of whether she was using her title or not, he had sworn to protect her, and even if he technically wasn't her knight anymore, he was still going to. Besides, in a world where she wasn't immediately recognized as a princess, he had to watch over her anyway and make sure she wasn't taken advantage of, or worse. He couldn't bear if something happened to her. It was simple. In the end, she was important to him, so of course he wanted to keep her safe. Before allowing his mind to wander further than that, he refocused himself on his current task, which was still leaning against him. He looked around her body, unsure of how he could get her off without potentially falling, before settling on the one idea that seemed safest. Careful not to wake her, he lowered his free hand, keeping his other firmly gripped on Zelda's shoulder, and took hold of the ancient device resting on his belt. After a few taps and a flash of yellow, Link watched as transparent glowing chains wrapped around Zelda's body, keeping her firmly in place. He gave her shoulder a few more taps to ensure her body would fall to the proper side once the chains were released.
Sorry, that was the best I could come up with. You were clinging to me a bit too much. Not that I minded, but I'd rather not risk you falling to the ground.
As his boots hit the ground, Zelda's body remained on the saddle, with the chains around her body keeping her in place, still twisted around as if her head was still buried in Link's neck. Link waited for a moment before the chains began to flicker, a sign that they'd be disappearing soon, and in a few seconds, they shattered into many shards of light before vanishing entirely. Owing to the few taps Link had given her shoulder, Zelda began to fall over just as planned until she slid out of the saddle and landed firmly in Link's arms. He looked down at her, now sleeping peacefully in his embrace.
Maybe I've gotten too used to using that thing to solve my problems.
Just as this thought came to his mind, Epona blew air through her snout and shook her mane. Link frowned.
Did you have a better idea?
Shaking her mane again, Epona began to slowly clop away, heading into the grassy field near the cliffside to graze.
See? That's what I thought. I know what I'm doing.
With Zelda in his arms, he carried her to the house. Before he could get to the door, he felt Zelda shift. Looking down as he walked, he found her clinging to his tunic, her eyes just barely opened as she looked to see where she was being carried.
Sorry, I was trying my best not to wake you.
Oh, is this the house you spoke of this morning?
Yeah, it's not much, but it's home.
As they stopped at the door, Link leaned down, careful not to drop Zelda while pulling on the doorknob. With a click and a creak, the door opened, revealing the inside of the small house. It was a simple house, with only one large room that consisted mainly of the dining area and a small loft that Zelda assumed was the sleeping area. She smiled at the sight.
Link, it's wonder.
With a chuckle, Link carried her inside. Gently and carefully, using his foot to close the door behind them, he immediately made for the stairs and carried Zelda up to the loft. At the end of the loft, near the corner beside a window, was a simple bed, where Link gently laid Zelda down. Feeling the soft sheets beneath her, Zelda instantly got comfortable before seemingly returning to her deep slumber. Link watched as her chest began to slowly and deeply rise up and down, a sign she had fallen asleep. He made to head back down the stairs, but the soft call of his name stopped him. He turned around to find Zelda's eyes still closed, but her hand now raised up at him, a sign to come back.
Can you take my boots off?
With a tiny smile, Link answered,
Of course.
before lightly sitting on the end of the bed. Taking one of her legs into his hands, he rested her calf on his thigh and began unbuckling the clasp around her ankle. Once undone, he gave a light tug and pulled off the boot, revealing the bare foot inside. It was at this moment Link felt his cheeks burn. He hadn't thought much of it, but now that he was doing it, this felt strangely inappropriate. Currently, he was undressing her while she was practically asleep, no less. Unable to control himself, he looked over at her sleeping figure. Her beautiful strands of long hair covered most of the bed. Her slim figure and hips were laid out for him to see, and of course, the legs that were in his lap. It was far too stimulating. It couldn't be right for someone of his status to be doing something like this, but Zelda had asked him so casually, even if she was tired. Was this normal for them personally, and he had just forgotten? Shaking away his thoughts, he took a deep breath and moved her leg away in order to take her other, deciding it was best to finish his task as quickly as possible. With the princess now comfortable and her feet free of their leather constraints, Zelda readjusted, curling herself up before completely falling asleep. Standing up and placing her boots at the foot of the bed, Link took a deep breath and headed back down the stairs, taking a seat at the dining table in the center of the room. Trying to take his mind off his earlier thoughts, he took the Sheikah slate from his belt and began tapping through its illuminated screen, now searching through its inventory.
Food, weapons, materials. I should have enough to keep the both of us alright for a while. Money, on the other hand. Olsen charged me 3,000 rupees to get this old house, and that was on discount without all the decor he added. I wonder how much he'll sell one of those display houses for. Ugh. I'm sure Zelda would prefer one of those houses to this old place, though. I might have to go mining or hunting. Find whatever I can to sell, and get our finances up for the time being.
Mentally planning, he continued to swipe through the slate, coming up with a list of things he and Zelda needed to do or gather for her before eventually landing back on the weapons tab. 4 weapons had caught his eye specifically: a large stone-crafted sword, an elegantly forged trident, a jewel-embedded sword and shield, and a heavy wooden bow. After staring at their icons for a few moments, he tapped on each of them. In a flash of blue stringy lights, each of the weapons appeared on the table, clanking slightly before settling. Gently, he took one of them into his hands, the trident, and lifted it up. He stared at the twisted 3 points of the trident, remembering the one who wielded it a century ago before remembering the rest of those who owned the other weapons. He remembered the hands he felt on his back, those that gave him the final push he needed, along with the glint he and Zelda had seen before they left the castle and headed to Kakariko Village.
Thank you. All of you. I hope you all can rest easy knowing we succeeded. We really did it. I hope.
He couldn't help but allow his concerns to seep into his mind. Monsters were still around Hyrule, and whether it was more than just them remained to be seen. He didn't like the thought of the Calamity still being around. If that was the case, then that would have meant Zelda's seal hadn't worked properly, and that was a thought Link despised. He wanted to have complete faith in her power. With a deep breath, he once again decided to shove his thoughts away. It could have simply been the final blood moon. Maybe all he had to do was clear out the remaining monsters, and that would be enough. Running his fingers along the trident's handle, he looked down at the rest of the weapons on the table. After a few moments of thought, he turned and glanced at the wall behind him as he formed an idea. Closing the door behind him, Link stepped into the grass outside the house. By now, the sun had long set, having passed the duty of illuminating the night to the moon and stars. After counting a few of the stars in the sky, Link looked out at the field beside the house to see Epona still grazing near the cliffside. He whistled to call the horse back to him. With a neigh, she trotted over before coming to a stop in front of him. Reaching into one of his small pouches, Link pulled an apple from its depths and held it out to the mare.
Here, girl. I brought you something. Thanks for your hard work these past few days, especially against Ganon. No other horse could have gotten me through that.
Eagerly but still gently, the chestnut mare lowered her head and took the apple from her owner, chewing it happily as Link began brushing her mane. After hearing her swallow, he took the horse by the reins.
Alright, let's get you into the stall.
Guiding her, he led her to the crudely built stall. Once she was backed into it, he unsaddled her and removed the reins. After a few more strokes to her mane and coat, he backed out of the stall and closed the gate.
Good night, Epona. Rest well. You deserve it.
With a final neigh from his mare, he placed a hand on her snout for a moment before walking away, choosing to sit beside the cooking pot where Bolson had been sitting a little earlier. Once settled, he took out the Sheikah slate again, and with a few taps of the screen, a piece of flint appeared in his hand. Placing the flint under the cooking pot next to him, he tapped on the slate a few times before pulling out a simple sword with a chipped blade. With a small strike of the sword to the flint, the wood under the cooking pot ignited, allowing Link's body to warm up. He returned the sword to the inventory before placing the slate on the ground and reaching up to unbuckle the belt strapped to him. Free from their constraints, Link grabbed the green-strapped handle of the much nicer sword behind him. He leaned against the large old tree trunk behind him. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and rested his head against the tree, listening to the fire crackle beside him. As much as he tried to ignore them, the old carpenter's words continued to swirl around his mind, no matter how much he tried to bury them. Along with the memory of Zelda's legs in his lap, he felt uneasy. He knew he'd be excited to see Zelda again, but this felt like more than just excitement. Was it a feeling he had forgotten from his past? He knew Zelda was important to him, but was this more than that? And was Zelda feeling the same thing? As he sat in silence pondering these thoughts, something else had come to mind. It was a song that a friendly bard had sung to him once before on his travels. There was a specific line that stuck with him for some time, one that he decided to quietly recite out loud.
A princess's love for her fallen knight awakens her power, and within the castle the calamity is forced to cower. A princess's love? Come on, there's no way it meant romantically. The princess isn't even the one who wrote the song.
Opening his eyes, he looked down at the purple-winged sword laying across his lap, with his hand still firmly wrapped around the green-strapped handle. Its blade rested comfortably in its blue and gold scabbard, while its wings reflected the orange light of the fire nearby. The sword didn't respond. All it gave was a very faint glow and a small, oddly familiar sound.
No comment, huh? Right, should have expected that. I'm thinking about this too much thanks to Bolson and Manny. Don't start fantasizing about the impossible. I'm just her friend, the one who's been by her side for so long. One of the few she has, especially now.
Again, the sword didn't respond, except this time, there wasn't a glow or sound to show it was listening. With a deep breath, Link rested his head against the tree's trunk again, lifting a knee up as he grew comfortable against it. Looking away from the sword, he gazed into the darkened view Bolson had shown him earlier, where mountains now resembled shadows against the starry night sky.
Let's try not to ruin that friendship, especially not with stupid fantasies.
It wasn't until she heard the sound of birds chirping that Zelda began to stir. Her eyes were blinded by the morning light, and she pushed herself up, rubbing and blinking them until they finally adjusted and allowed her to see the room she was in. It all looked familiar, but not at the same time, since she had only gotten a brief view of the place before she fell back asleep. She looked down to find herself still fully dressed, except for her boots, which she found neatly placed beside the bed.
This must be Link's house. I don't even remember coming in. Did he carry me inside?
Having deduced where she was, she took a better look around the loft. It was small, just large enough to walk around, but not enough to fully furnish. There was the bed in the corner where she currently sat, and a very small nightstand beside it. At the end of the bed was a dresser, and across from that was a small writing desk pushed against the loft's wooden safety railing. Still looking around, Zelda gracefully swung her legs over the bedside and stood. Deciding to leave her boots where they were, she walked across the loft floor, gently dragging her fingers across the furniture before stopping near the dresser. There was nothing but an empty space on the wall above it. Zelda hummed.
A picture would look lovely here.
Eventually, she found herself down the stairs, inspecting the living area. There was a small sparse kitchen near the front door in the corner, containing only a few pots, pans, and several bottles on a high shelf. In the center of the room was a dining table decorated with a vase of flowers and some plates. Under the stairs was a pantry filled with boxes and other provisions. While this was all quite nice, what stood out the most were the wall decorations, weapon racks displaying weapons that Zelda recognized. She stepped across the room and around the table to get a better look at them.
This is where he decided to put them?
She reached out a hand and gently brushed her fingers against one of the weapons on the wall, the scimitar with the gold and jewel-encrusted hilt. Her face fell slightly as she looked over to the other wall to find the matching shield hanging proudly, its jewels shining. Remembering their owner, she closed her eyes.
Mifu, Rivali, Daruk, Poser. I'm sorry I couldn't save you all. I hope you were able to see the calamity be sealed. We did it. All of us together. Just as we said we would.
After standing in front of the weapon racks for some time, she took a deep breath and stepped away. Looking around again, she began specifically searching for something, or rather, someone. She hadn't seen him upstairs, nor did he seem to be down here. Concerned, Zelda hurried to the door, only to have those worries instantly vanish. There, leaning against the tree and snoozing quietly, was Link. Instantly, her heartbeat began to slow. She hadn't even realized it had started beating faster. Only then did it dawn on her that there was only one bed in the house.
Had he chosen to sleep out here because of that?
Shaking her head in disapproval, she stepped out of the house, stepping barefoot across the soft grass as she tiptoed over to Link's sleeping figure, crouching down to his level as she approached.
Link. Link. It's morning. Hey there.
Gently, she raised a hand and lightly pressed the back of her index finger against his cheek. Link grunted awake before his eyes widened. In a flash, the Master Sword had been unsheathed, and as the scabbard fell to the ground, Link quickly reached over and took Zelda by the waist, pulling her body against his own. With the sword at the ready, he looked around before realizing she had awoken him. When their eyes met, Zelda could feel a burn in her cheeks as her body remained pressed against Link's. Placing a hand on his chest, she cleared her throat as best she could.
Good morning. I apologize. I didn't mean to frighten you.
Princess?
He remained frozen for a moment, still holding the sword out in front of them. After a few seconds, he jolted.
Princess, I'm so sorry about that. Are you alright?
I'm just fine. And even if I wasn't, it looks like you would have protected me. That makes me feel much more secure, even though I already felt as such. A better question is, are you alright?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Releasing her waist, he reached over to grab the scabbard he had dropped in order to sheath the master sword.
Sorry, it's just... being out here, you have to stay ready, just in case. I'm sure you remember that from before.
I do, but that's when we had to sleep outdoors during our travels. Why are you sleeping out here when there's a perfectly fine bed indoors?
I'm sure you saw, but there's only one bed. Of course, I offered it to you.
That doesn't answer my question.
With grass crunching beneath her, she scooted closer to him.
Why did you sleep out here instead of in your bed?
Because you were in it? What are you getting at?
Link, it doesn't matter if I was in it or not. It's your bed. You should have slept in it instead of uncomfortably against a tree.
Zelda, with all due respect, I wasn't gonna have you sleep out here or on the floor or anywhere not in a bed. It was the right thing to do.
No, the right thing to do would have been to share the bed.
To share the bed. Princess,
Oh, stop it, Link. You're doing it again. You said you wouldn't call me that, and as of now, that title isn't even correct. I'm not a princess anymore, so no special treatment. Meaning, we should have shared the bed instead of you sleeping out here in the dirt.
The dirt wasn't so bad, really. I'm sorry. I guess we could have shared, but you weren't awake enough for me to ask, even if the thought had occurred to me. It just made the most sense at the time.
It's fine. Just remember that for next time. I don't mind sharing a bed with you.
Right. Well, hopefully there doesn't need to be a next time.
At the sound of this, Zelda's brow furrowed.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, there are some nice display houses across the bridge over there. I feel bad having made you sleep in my old bed for the night, but I think I can gather enough money today and buy you a house of your own for tonight. It's not a castle, but they are nice enough. At least I think. Zelda, what's wrong?
He glanced at her, only to see Zelda's crestfallen features.
Oh, nothing. It's just... I thought I'd be staying here with you. I didn't know you wanted me to get a place of my own, but I guess that makes sense. It was foolish of me to assume otherwise.
Is a place of your own not what you wanted?
I mean, it's not that I didn't want a place of my own. I just believed that you'd be wherever I went. And when you said we could rest at your house, I just assumed this would be a place of... Again, it was really foolish of me to think we'd be living together.
They stood in an awkward silence for a moment. Link frowned, looking at her face before glancing over at his house. With one more glance down at the sword in his hands, he took a deep breath.
Did you want to live here with me? I don't want you to be uncomfortable. I don't know how it is to live with someone like me. I mean, I'm a knight, and you're still royalty, whether you go by your title or not. The house is small, and even out here, it's pretty run down. I'm sure this entire house could fit in your room in the castle. I don't know if you'd be all that happy here.
If you're here, then I promise you I'd be happy. Regardless of our titles, I want to be here with you, Besides, this is a wonderful house. It has so much character, and it's cozy. I feel warm being here. I want to stay here with you, to live here with you, but only if you're okay with it.
Yeah.
As much as he felt like this was a bad idea, especially with how he'd felt the night before, he couldn't refuse those bright green eyes of hers.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
You're not just saying that, are you?
Zelda leaned towards Link's face, staring deep into his azure eyes.
I know how I can be. I know I can get a bit stubborn. And with me having lived in the castle before, I probably have a lot to learn when it comes to living in such a small place.
I'm not just saying that, I promise.
He leaned back against the tree sitting behind them, internally wondering if this was her not wanting to be alone after just waking up, or if she wasn't used to living alone, having always had assurance in the castle. Noticing her look of hesitation, he continued.
I'm not. In fact, I'm happier about it than I'd like you to know. Though, now I'm going to have a talk with Bolson.
Bolson?
You'll meet him. For now, I guess I should say welcome to your new home, shouldn't I?
My new home? No. This is our new home, and it's good to be here. I feel at home already.
At this, Zelda beamed. It was a smile that pierced through Link's chest, even if he didn't outwardly show it. Deciding it best to give some reaction to show he was happy about her staying, even while in denial about that happiness, he gave a small smile.
Good. Well, then how about I cook us some breakfast? We've got a long day ahead of us.
Right. We still need to go see Pura.
That, amongst other things, if you're gonna live here. I think we should get you some new clothing for the road whenever we're on it.
New clothing? Why? Is my travel gear not enough?
It would be, but the Gyu clan is still around. I think it's best if, for now, no one knows you're back, and unfortunately, your clothing is a dead giveaway to who you are. I think it would be best if we got you a commoner's outfit, even if it's a little less comfortable, along with a few other outfits for different weather situations. I'm sure you remember Hyrule's ever-changing climate, if you're alright with that.
If you believe that's what's best, then I trust you. Besides, if I'm dropping my title, then I believe I should start getting used to such clothing and other necessities, right?
Right. Well, shall we get the day started?
We shall.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of the Couple of the Wild Audioplay. Let us know what your favorite part of this chapter was in the comments, and if you enjoyed, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you can be updated with future releases. If you want to read ahead in the story, check the link in the description below, and if you want more Zelda dubbed content, consider checking out the rest of the channel. We'll see you in the next chapter. Stay tuned.